minute to showtime.
The engines are on.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
When they wrote up the systems and the rule set that we use, did working people get to write a line? What class of men on pen and paper jotted down their clues? With capital, the heart of their design. When 90 million want a thing, but some shareholders say no. Which class of people get to have their way? The people read the fine print and say that this thing has got to go. And we'll start writing a new contract here today. Don't you know that hundreds will work and one man keeps the money? They don't think they gotta tell us why. When they say the new social contract, all the bosses will be gobsmacked and everyone will want a sign. Oh, yeah, everyone will want a sign.
Hey, all right. We're testing out some new changes here on our Restream broadcast. So, okay, everything's working the way it should be. Thank you very much for joining us, cousins. We are doing a special bonus episode in somewhat celebration of our 2-year anniversary of the show and approaching or being right around 100 episodes. So in so doing, our own Mr. Mayor Jared is going to continue his reading from last week, and I once again cannot remember the title. It is Frederick Engels Socialism: Utopian and Scientific. Really snappy title, easy to remember, rolls right off the tongue. So I'm going to quiet it down, and we're going to go to school, and he's going to continue. If you want to hear the first part of this, you can check it out in our archive as well as all of the rest of our past episodes on YouTube and Rumble. And you can follow us everywhere else that people can follow people. So take it away, Mr. Jared.
So we read chapter 1 last week, which detailed the utopian aspect of our socialism, utopian and scientific. And this week we are doing chapter 3. We're skipping chapter 2. It's not because chapter 2 is not important. It's just there's only so much time in this world, and I'm limiting this to chapter 1 and 3 because I think
we're hitting the high points.
There's the most points for me to make. Chapter 2 gives an overview of dialectics, the idea of two seemingly contradictory truths who, by working between the two of them and working the contradiction between them, you can arrive at a higher form of truth. A kind of spiral-y reasoning thing where oh, it's this, oh, it's the opposite, oh, it's this actually, and then you gradually you get. You can see that all over the place, but it's not I want to get to chapter 3, historical materialism, which is based on dialectical reasoning. That's how you arrive at some of these conclusions. It is a tiny bit longer than chapter 1, but I think if I keep reading and don't talk too much, we'll be able to crank through it. This is one of the texts that I recommend if people... There is no perfect first thing you should read. Really, the first thing you should read is frickin' anything, because nobody reads any... everybody who calls themselves socialist communist, nobody reads a dang word of the theory. But this can be a good suggestion for an introductory text, because we're about to just do basically a rundown of what is the rationalization for... socialism as a concept, for communism as a concept, and what is a general summation of Marx's theory. How did he arrive at this? What's his explanation for why things are how they are and how we can change them, etc. Okay. The materialist conception of history starts from the proposition that the production of the means to support human life and, next to production, the exchange of things produced, is the basis of all social structure. That in every society that has appeared in history, the manner in which wealth is distributed and society divided into classes or orders is dependent on what is produced, how it is produced, and how the products are exchanged. From this point of view, the final causes of all social changes and political revolutions are to be sought not in men's brains, not in men's better insights into eternal truth and justice, but in changes in the modes of production and exchange. They are to be sought not in philosophy, but in economics of each particular epoch. The growing perception that existing societal institutions are unreasonable and unjust, that reason has become unreason, and right wrong, is only proof that the modes of production and exchange changes have silently taken place with which the social order adapted to earlier economic conditions is no longer in keeping. Long sentence. From this, it also follows that the means of getting rid of the incongruities that have been brought to light must also be present in a more or less developed condition within the changed modes of production themselves. These means are not to be invented by deduction from fundamental principles, but are to be discovered in the stubborn facts of the existing system of production. Last week we talked about how there is no great communism explainer who is going to descend and say the correct words and explain into existence through how brilliant they are, like a new form of being. No, you go through stuff, and based on how you make the things and how you exchange them, like how do you farm and how do you trade your farm stuff, if you go back a few hundred years. All right, what then is the position of the modern socialism in this connection? What does this have to do with socialism? The present situation of society, this is now generally conceded in this, we're talking middle of the 1800s when he's writing this, so put your mind there. This is now generally conceded, is the creation of the ruling class of today, of the bourgeoisie, the mode of production peculiar to the bourgeoisie, known since Marx as the capitalist mode of production, was incompatible with the feudal system, kings and queens, with the privileges it conferred upon individuals, their entire social ranks and local corporations, as well as with the hereditary ties of subordination which constituted the framework of its social organization. King, have a son, dumb. The bourgeoisie broke up the feudal system, king, son, dumb, and built upon its ruins the capitalist order of society. The kingdom of free competition, of personal liberty, of the equality before the law, of all, because like you couldn't take a guy to trial if he was like a duke or whatever in the past. They're like, that is dumb. Like this, we've moved on from that. Well, kinda. We've supposedly moved to a equality under the law, but you know, of all commodity owners, of all the rest of capitalist blessings. Thenceforward, the capitalist mode of production could develop in freedom, since steam, machinery, and the making of machines by machinery transformed the older manufacture into modern industry. The productive forces evolved under the guidance of the bourgeoisie, developed with a rapidity and in a degree unheard of before. But just as the older manufacturer, in its time, manufacturer meaning like freaking, what is it? It's like everybody's kind of I don't know if I can do a good explanation quickly, but they distinguish having a big factory where all the stuff is made within one zone from the just before that where you had like advanced farm machinery, but it was still kind of segmented and then eventually brought together. That's when he talks about manufacture versus industry. We're definitely into like developed industry at this point. We aren't really in a period of manufacture unless you're running like a t-shirt printing place out of your basement. That'd be like a manufacturer as opposed to a factory that sews the shirt, does the thing, does the ink, does this, like does the entire operation in one building. But just as the older manufacture in its time and handicraft, that's just making a thing in your house with a spinning wheel, becoming more developed under its influence, had come into collision with the feudal trammels of the guilds, so now modern industry, in its complete development, comes into collision with the bounds within which the capitalist mode of production holds it confined. The new productive forces have already outgrown the capitalistic mode of using them, and this conflict between productive forces and the modes of production is not a conflict engendered in the mind of a man, like that between original sin and divine justice. It exists, in fact, objectively, outside us, independently of the will and actions, even of the men that have brought it on. The machine's just running, and no one's even really running it. It just is there. It doesn't really matter if a guy wants a thing. All right. Modern socialism is nothing but the reflex in thought of this conflict in fact. Its ideal reflection in the minds, first, of the class directly suffering under it, the working class. Now, in what does this conflict consist? Before capitalist production, i.e., the Middle Ages, the system of petty industry obtained generally based upon the private property of the laborers in the means of production. In the country, the agriculture of the small peasant, freeman, or serf. In the towns, the handicrafts organize in guilds. The instrument of labor, land, agricultural implements, the workshop, the means of production, the tool, or the instruments of labor of single individuals, adapted for the use of one worker, and therefore, of necessity, small, dwarfish, circumscribed. But for this very reason, they belonged to a rule of the producer himself. You got your own, like, sickle that you go to the field with, and, got it. To concentrate these scattered, limited means of production, to enlarge them, to turn them into powerful levers of production of the present day, this was precisely the historic role of capitalist production and of its upholder, the bourgeoisie. In the fourth section of Capital, Marx has explained in detail how since the 15th century this has been historically, I'm reading that like right now, this has been historically worked out through the three phases of simple cooperation, manufacture, and modern industry. But the bourgeoisie, as shown there, and it's not that that's irrelevant, it's interesting to know about, but we are currently in the year 2025, we are so far away from, like, handicraft cooperation and manufacture that it's like, that's like Dickensian, even like before that, even in like Dickensian novels, that was industry, really. Like, you had big, like, what they would think of as humongous factories, which to us would look very small. So this is if you roll your eyes like, oh, this is irrelevant. I think it's important to maybe know how a thing leads to another, because then maybe you can imagine how it then, not imagine, scientifically work out how it will then lead to another thing. And if you look at, like, the steps that immediately preceded where we are right now, it can be helpful to then see, like, all right, what's logically. All right. But the bourgeoisie, as shown in here, could not transform these puny means of production into mighty productive forces without transforming them at the same time from means of production of the individual into social means of production, only workable by a collectivity of men. The spinning wheel, the hand loom, the blacksmith's hammer were replaced by the spinning machine, the power loom, the steam hammer, the individual workshop by the factory, employing the cooperation of hundreds and thousands of workmen. In like manner, production itself changed from a series of individual into a series of social acts, and the production from individual to social products. The yarn, the cloth, the metal articles now come out of the factory were the joint production of many workers, through whose hands they had successively to pass before they were ready. No one person could say of them, I made that is my product. Hundreds will work, but that's where the social and socialism comes from. It's that we've moved to social production, where in the past we had individual production, where, like, you, a guy, would have your little farm and you'd take all your oats to the freaking market at the end of it, to threshing machines and industrial farming of today, and all the little intermediary steps between, like, the 1500s and now, which are, isn't that a better way to try and chart the history of people and cultures than, like, well, you see, one very smart Elon Musk comes along, and then all these miracles, all these developments happen, and just because one really industrious, great dude did all the, like, it's like, no, you,
Daddy
the
billionaire.
teamwork itself is, yeah. Say something, Nicolette.
Well, just I can comment on this a little bit personally. As before the pandemic, I had a very small soap business. And it's starting to get a little bit successful, except for the fact that the pandemic happened and all the price jacking happened, and I therefore couldn't afford to buy the supplies anymore, and it became a whole big thing, and I haven't been able to revive it since. But at the same time, it's like what you're saying, like you are to some degree in this handicraft area reliant on being able to go and get the supplies, because it's not like I was able to go out to my coconut tree grove and harvest the coconut oil.
You're not mining lye out of the earth.
Right, exactly that. Yeah. And it was all like a whole natural thing. So it's like, okay, like, yeah, I do actually use what I have on hand, like rose petals and lavender that I literally grow. But, at the same time, that's a finite amount of stuff. So I can, in fact, relate to the handicraft singular manufacturer. But also, when prices get out of control and you do have to buy resources from other locations, then your business fails.
It's interesting to think about America, because, yeah, we're it's not that we're is that what post-industrial means? Are we post-industrial? Like, we do not work majority industrial, where England in 1860, it was a far larger chunk was literal, like, proletariat, work in a factory making linen. Like, so it's like, how do you? Some people will say that for that reason, like, oh, you can't ever have your proletarian revolution because it's only like 6% of the U.S. workforce work in like factories and rail and transport, etc.
Right.
Versus,
Which was by design by people that were trying to get rid of labor unions at this point, but.
I sing songs and try to sell CDs. My labor is not necessary to society, even though people like it. So,
yeah.
And everybody I know, they work at Starbucks, they work service industry, they drive Uber. It's just
Yeah, we're forced into this situation. I think most people would rather go into business for themselves if it were viable and possible and doable. I hope one day I can go back into doing that if maybe prices deflate at some point or something. But
I want you to
I
have
don't
your
want to write
one
it off.
day. You should have one day a month of, quote, productive labor where you got, I don't know, whatever it is, and then the rest of the month you could do whatever the hell you want. Open. It's a great, if you have enough free time. Boom, entrepreneurial enterprise. I just like redundancy myself there, but I think that's where you get that. It's like you can have. I want it to be Cisco's dad's restaurant. To talk about Star Trek, where he just runs it for the love of the game. You don't pay to go to the restaurant. He just is like, I'm a really good cook and I want to show people my food. And it's like, okay,
Right, yeah.
great. He doesn't like, oh no, I didn't sell enough food. Now I'm gonna die.
And that is sort of the modern utopian idea with automation and AI being in things. Like, we're not against the idea of automation. People shouldn't have to do shit labor and sell their bodies to moving boxes all goddamn day. If a robot can do it, you shouldn't have to do it. But we also should be getting paid to not have to do shit, and then we can do that our own shit in the meantime, and we'd have a much healthier and happier society.
AI itself, no one person could say of them, I made that, this is my product. AI is the result of the culmination of the labor of millions of people through hundreds of years of working, blah, blah. But who gets to decide what happens with your AI? Like, a couple of people on a board somewhere get to be like, we will direct it in this way. Like,
You
who
tech
directs
billionaires
production is
who
just
get the
so
government to
omniimportant.
write policy in their favor so that they can cram it down everybody's throats in completely useless and world ruining ways.
You have social production, now we need social ownership, and that's all that's all this is. All this, all right. But where, in a given society, the fundamental form of production is that spontaneous division of labor which creeps in gradually and not upon any preconceived plan, there the products take on the form of commodities, whose mutual exchange, buying and selling, enable the individual producers to satisfy their manifold wants. And this was the case in the Middle Ages. The peasant sold his artisanal agricultural products and bought from him the products of handicraft. Into the society of individual producers, the commodity producers, the new mode of production thrust itself. It's more specialization. You have, like, I just do wheat, and then I bring all my wheat and get all the other stuff I need by exchanging my wheat. Commodity production. Wheat is a commodity. Okay. In the midst of the old division of labor, grown up spontaneously and upon no definite plan. There was no big god eye telling all of the handicraft people what to do. You just kind of did it based on, I need this, you need that. Which had governed
Met the need for your particular area.
Which had governed the whole of society, now arose division of labor upon a definite plan. As organized in the factory, side by side with individual production, appeared social production. The products of both were sold on the same market, and therefore at prices at least approximately equal. But organization upon a definite plan was stronger than spontaneous division of labor. The factories, working with the combined social forces of a collectivity of individuals, produced their commodities far more cheaply than the individual small producers. Individual producers succumbed in one department after the other. Socialized production revolutionized all of the old methods of production, but its revolutionary character was, at the same time, so little recognized that it was, on the contrary, introduced as a means of increasing and developing the production of commodities. When it arose, it found ready-made, and found liberal use of, certain machinery for the production and exchange of commodities. The merchant's capital, handicraft, wage labor, socialized production, thus introducing itself as a new form of the production of commodities. It was a matter of course that under it, the old forms of appropriation remained in full swing, like the feudal modes of appropriation. The king gets his like chunk of it. The idea of like, I am the man governing this area. All of the stuff comes to me. Like that's the old mode of appropriation. Remained in full swing and were applied to its products as well. We have social production, but private accumulation of profit and product. You have no say over what happens at the Ford factory, even if you're the guy fucking screwing in the shit on the car. It's the guy who, your boss's boss's boss, directs all of it. You're just a cog in the machine. All right. In the medieval stage of evolution of the production of commodities, the question as to the... I don't mean to get ahead of this text, but I keep accidentally doing it. The question of the owner of the product of labor could not arise. The individual producer, as a rule, had, from raw material belonging to himself, and generally of his own handiwork, produced it with only his own tools, by the labor of his own hands, or of his family. You own the soap you make. I own the CDs that I had someone else print for me in New Jersey and then ship to me with products from China, etc. Like you're still in the whole, like you're not out of the cycle. What is it?
You pay for the raw materials, but it's yours in the end of the day.
There was no need for him to appropriate the new product. It belonged wholly to him, as a matter of course. Everyone's like, yeah, duh, of course. You own the basket you weaved. His property in the product was, therefore, based upon his own labor. You worked. You made it. It's yours. Even where external help was used, this was, as a rule, of little importance and was, and very generally was compensated by something other than wages. The apprentices and journeymen of the guilds worked less for board and wages than for education, in order that they might become master craftsmen themselves. Then came the concentration of the means of production and of the producers in large workshops and manufactories, their transformation into actual socialized means of production and socialized producers. But the socialized producers and means of production and their products were still treated after this change just as they were before, i.e. the means of production and the products of individuals. Hitherto, the owner of the instruments of labor had himself appropriated the product because, as a rule, it was his own product and the assistance of others was the exception. Usually you do all your own work and then maybe someone will help you a little bit, but it's still like yours. Now, the owner of the instruments of labor was always appropriated to himself the product, although it was no longer his product, but exclusively the product of the labor of others. I own the tools. I own the auto shop. Therefore, I'm the boss, and I get to say what happens with all of the money. And you get a little bit. You get this much. But I don't really do that much work. All right. Thus, the products now produced socially were not appropriated by those who had actually set in motion the means of production and actually produced the commodities, but by the capitalists. The means of production and production itself had become in essence socialized, but they were subjected to a form of appropriation which presupposes the private production of individuals, under which, therefore, every one owns his product and brings it to market. The mode of production is subjected to this form of appropriation, although it abolishes the conditions upon which the latter rests. It used to make sense. These are my tools. I made the thing. It's mine. I'm going to sell it. Now these are my tools, and I'm General Mills, and the My Tools is a giant factory that employs thousands of people and around the world and sells globally. Oh, but I'm the guy. It's a private production. I made the thing. Here's my product. So like you see, that just doesn't make sense. It's the old form of that's basically like how the king was, how the duke was. This is my estate, so I get all the grain and I decide what happens. You get a little bit that you get to keep to.
Probably the modern equivalent there is why most Walmart and Amazon employees are on have to use Snap to survive. So
we came back to you get your tiny bit, but it's through government assistance programs.
Right.
Right. This contradiction, which gives to the new mode of production its capitalistic character, contains the germ of the whole of the social antagonisms of today. The greater the mastery of, and the thing is, the reason this matters is that's happening right now. You just have to have eyes to see it. What the new thing, the new society, the communism, whatever, it's already kind of here in some form. It just isn't, because that's how it always is. The new becomes the old, becomes the new, becomes the old. Dialectics. It's more like a spiral than a straight line. The greater the mastery obtained by the new mode of production over all important fields of production and in all manufacturing countries, the more it reduced individual production to an insignificant residuum. The more clearly was brought out in the incompatibility of socialized production with capitalistic appropriation. Like you see all the problem, all the troubles. The first capitalists found, as we have said, alongside of other forms of labor, wage labor ready-made for them on the market. But it was exceptional, complementary, accessory, transitory wage labor. The agricultural laborer, though, upon occasion, he hired himself out by the day, had a few acres of his own land on which he could, at all events, live in a pinch. The guilds were so organized that the journeyman of today became the master of tomorrow. But all this changed as soon as the means of production became socialized and concentrated in the hands of capitalists. The means of production, as what he's saying is, not a lot of people were going around like, help, I need work, I'm applying for a job from someone else. Usually if you were that class, like most of us would be today, we would be small land farmers. If it was like the year 1000 or whatever, we'd have our like couple acres and a couple sheep and like a couple corn plants or whatever, and you can exist not in luxury, but you don't die, because everyone owned a little bit of property, and the people who were like kind of basically vagrants, day laborers going around, were the extreme minority. That was very, very few people way back then, and you see through history how that just becomes more and more people as they start taking, they get your land. They don't want you to own anything. The you will own nothing and be happy started so many years ago, and it's reaching its zenith where we own just so little now. And where my wage labor, aforetime the exception and accessory, became the rule and the basis of all production, aforetime complementary, it now became the sole remaining function of the worker. The wage worker, for a time, became a wage worker for life. The number of these permanent was further enormously increased by the breaking up of the feudal system that occurred at the same time, by the disbanding of the retainers of the feudal lords of taking people's land, the eviction of the peasants from their homesteads, etc. The separation was made complete between the means of production concentrated in the hands of the capitalists on the one side and the producers possessing nothing but their labor power on the other. The contradiction between socialized production and capitalistic appropriation manifested itself as the antagonism of proletariat and bourgeoisie. That's his summarizing italics sentence there. Not overnight, over the course of a couple of 100 years, 400 years, depending on how you think about it. We have seen that the capitalistic mode of production thrusts its way into a society of commodity producers, of individual producers, whose social bond was the exchange of their products. But every society based on the production of commodities has this peculiarity, that the producers have lost control over their own social inner relations. Each man produces for himself with such means of production as he may happen to have, and for such exchange as he may require to satisfy his remaining wants. No one knows how much of his particular article is coming on the market, nor how much of it will be wanted. No one knows whether his individual product will meet an actual demand, whether he will be able to make good his cost of production, or even to sell his commodity at all. Anarchy reigns in socialized production. You just kind of make stuff and hope somebody's going to buy it. We kind of know how that feels. Yeah. But the production of commodities, like every other form of production, has its peculiar inherent laws inseparable from it. And these laws work despite anarchy, in and through anarchy. It's like, despite no one actually having a literal plan, currents emerge. Like, you know what I mean? You don't need a council of evil or good or anything. Just like things tend to, because of the material conditions, not because of God, not because of anybody thinking these things into existence. All right. They reveal themselves in the only persistent form of social interrelations, i.e. exchange, the only persistent form. Like throughout all of human history, we've traded. Trade has been a thing, exchange. And here they affect the individual producers as compulsory laws of competition. They affect the individual producers as compulsory laws of competition, right? They are, at first, unknown to these producers themselves and have to be discovered by them gradually and as a result of experience. You know, you bring your corn every year and then you're like, oh shit, that guy's got corn. All right, I set my price and the market. He's describing the invisible hand of the market. They work themselves out, therefore, independently of the producers and in antagonism to them as inexorable natural laws of their particular form of production. The product governs the producers. In medieval society, especially in the earlier centuries, production was essentially directed towards satisfying the wants of the individual. It satisfied, in the main, only the wants of the producer and his family. Where relations of personal dependence existed, as in the country, it also helped to satisfy the wants of the feudal lord. In all these there was, therefore, no exchange. The products, consequently, did not assume the character of commodities, because the king just got them. There's no, like, the free market. It's, the king's getting it. I'm farming, the king will get almost all of it, and then I will get a little bit of whatever at the end to make sure I don't die, because if I die, the king gets nothing. He needs somebody to work his farms. The family of the peasant produced almost everything they wanted: clothes, furniture, as well as the means of subsistence. Only when it began to produce more than was sufficient to supply its own wants, and the payments in kind to the feudal lords, only then did it also produce commodities. This surplus, thrown into socialized exchange and offered for sale, became commodities. I got some extra wheat. The artisans in the towns, it is true, had from the first to produce for exchange, but they also themselves supplied the greatest parts of their individual wants. They had gardens and plots of land. They turned their cattle out to a communal forest, which also yielded them timber and firing. The women spun flax, wool, and so forth. Production for the purpose of exchange, production of commodities, was only in its infancy. Hence, exchange was restricted, the market narrow, the methods of production stable, the backfiring cars loud. There were local exclusiveness without local unity within. The mark in the country, in the town, the guild. But with the extension of the production of commodities, and especially with the introduction of the capitalist mode of production, the laws of commodity production, hitherto latent, came into action more openly and with greater force. The old bonds were loosened, the old exclusive limits broken through, the producers were more and more turned into independent, isolated producers of commodities. It became apparent that the production of society at large was ruled by absence of plan, by accident, by anarchy, and this anarchy grew to greater and greater height. But the chief means by aid of which the capitalist mode of production intensified this anarchy of socialized production was the exact opposite of anarchy. It was the increasing organization of production upon a social basis in every individual productive establishment. By this, the old, peaceful, stable condition of things was ended. Wherever this organization of production was introduced into a branch of industry, it brooked no other method of production by its side. The field of labor became a battleground. The great geographical discoveries and the colonization following them multiplied markets and quickened the transformation of handicraft into manufacture. The war, basically, like, this is some snowball shit, and once you get it going, it go, woo, it goes. You cannot be the small farmer next to Tyson chicken. Like, it just doesn't. The war did not simply break out between the individual producers of particular localities. The local struggles begat, in their turn, national conflicts, the commercial wars of the 17th and 18th centuries. Eventually, imperialism up in here. Finally, modern industry and the opening of the world market made the struggle universal, and at the same time gave it an unheard of virulence. Advantages in natural or artificial conditions of production now decide the existence or non-existence of individual capitalists, as well as the whole of industries and countries. He that falls is remorselessly cast aside. It is the Darwinian struggle for the individual for existence transferred from nature to society with intensified violence. The conditions of the conditions of existence, natural to the animal, appear as the final term of human development. The contradiction between socialized production and capitalistic appropriation now presents itself as an antagonism between the organization of production in the individual workshop and the anarchy of production in society generally. The capitalistic mode of production moves in these two forms of the antagonism imminent to it from its very origin. It is never able to get out of that vicious circle which Fourier had already discovered, which Fourier could not, indeed, see in his time, that the circle is gradually narrowing to the moment becomes more and more a spiral and must come to an end. Like how he's talking about 10-year cycles, now it's like 10-day cycles. These economies are flipping around. Like, it's not good. It's certainly not stable, I guess. Like, where everyone's shitting their pants all the time. It shouldn't be like that. More and more like a spiral and comes to an end, like the movement of planets by collision with the center. It is the compelling force of anarchy in the production of society at large that more and more completely turns the great majority of men into proletarians, and it is the masses of the proletariat again who will finally put an end to anarchy in production. It is the compelling force of anarchy in social production that turns the limitless perfectibility of machinery under modern industry into a compulsory law by which every individual industrial capitalist must perfect his machinery more and more under penalty of ruin. And we've kind of reached, not quite a pinnacle. I don't think there ever is really a pinnacle. I think we'll always be innovating until the end of our species. But we are at a point where we don't have to do much work at all. We could do good ending AI at any time. But the perfecting of machinery is making human labor superfluous. If the introduction and increase of machinery means the displacement of millions by manual, by a few machine workers, improvement in machinery means the displacement of more and more of the machine workers themselves. It means, in the last instance, the production of a number of available wage workers in excess of the average needs of capital in the formation of a complete industrial reserve army, as I called it in 1845, available at times when industry is working at high pressure to be cast out upon the streets when the inevitable crash comes. How everybody loses their job when the markets go down, and when they're coming up, it's the whole like nobody's hiring, whatever, nobody wants to work anymore. Like the reserve army of freaking Nicolette, me at certain times, like everybody I know, like that's what gig work is now in for. Like, okay, the industrial reserve army will sop you up with like Uber Eats driving, and just like, fewer and fewer people have like quote the good jobs are just becoming extinct, and that's been happening forever.
Yeah, and it's almost as if there was a historical precedent for what's going on now.
You can look at these things with invisible hand of the market and with frickin' reading tea leaves and praying to deities and stuff, or you can look at historical materialism. These things have been happening for so long. They've been frickin' charted and mapped at this point. Yes, they're in a higher level of development than ever, but it's examinable. It's not like it's not random whim. We have a very planned economy at this point at an international, like a pretty much global scale. All right, I got to keep moving, or I'm gonna run out of time here. Where am I? Oh yeah, to be cast out upon the street when the inevitable crash comes, a constant dead weight upon the limbs of the working class in its struggle for existence with capital, a regulator for keeping of wages down to the low level that suits the interest of capital. Heck, when we're fighting about everyone wants to make every argument frickin' moral, and it drives me insane. But when we talk about like the border crisis, like labor being brought in to do. Like, it's not that people are coming here to maliciously take our jobs, but if an industry wants to suppress wages, one way you can do that is to import a bunch of workers who basically have no rights. Like, why would you not want a labor force that has no control over its frickin' destiny and essentially is in a new form of modern, like, bondage and slavery? Okay. Reserve army of labor. That's kind of one of the modern incarnations of it. Just people who are in frickin' misery, and just in case, we can scoop them up if we need somebody to do some just horrible work. Thus, it comes about, to quote Marx, that machinery becomes the most powerful weapon in the war of capital against the working class, that the instruments of labor constantly tear the means of subsistence out of the hands of the laborer, that the very product of the worker is turned into an instrument for his subjugation. Thus, it comes about that the economizing of the instruments of labor become, at the same time, from the outset, the most reckless waste of labor power and robbery based upon the normal conditions under which labor functions in that machinery. Here we go, we're doing some quotes. The most powerful instrument for shortening labor time becomes the most unfailing means for placing every moment of the laborer's time and that of his family at the disposal of the capitalist for the purpose of expanding the value of his capital. Thus, it comes about that the overwork of some becomes the preliminary condition for the idleness of others. Basically, some guys are getting their ass kicked in there, and then other people are perpetually unemployed and having a bad time because they can't find work. And that modern industry, which hunts after new consumers all over the world, over the whole world, forces the consumption of the masses at home down to a starvation minimum, and in doing so, thus destroys its own home market. This was just before Great Depression, but that's how we're all taught the Great Depression happened, right? People can't afford to buy anything because they're all so broke because you won't pay them. Thus, we now have food stamps and shit to like help keep that from happening again. It's like people have to be buying these products or the economy grinds to a halt and bad things happen. So let's hand out some crumbs of crumbs that you have to jump through hoops for. The law that always equilibrates the relative surplus population, or industrial reserve army, to the extent and energy of accumulation. This law rivets the laborer to capital more firmly than the wedges of Vulcan did Prometheus to the rock. You got to work or you die. It establishes an accumulation of misery corresponding with accumulation of capital. Accumulation of wealth at one pole is therefore at the same time accumulation of misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, and mental degradation at the opposite pole, i.e. on the side of the class that produces its own product in the form of capital. More capital quotes. And to expect any other division of the products from the capitalist mode of production is the same as expecting the electrodes of a battery not to decompose acidulated water, not to liberate oxygen at the positive, hydrogen at the negative pole, so long as they are connected with the battery. He's essentially saying, like, they don't do this because, like, a vibe. They don't do it because they wanna, because it's like, I feel like doing these things just for whatever reason. It's like, no, this is what the conditions produce the way things are. Like the system is what it produces. Have you heard that expression before? There isn't some evil puppet master doing things. To expect capitalism to behave differently than it does would be the same as expecting. I like how he uses the most obtuse analogy possible. Not to decompose acidulated water. Thank you very much, Engels. Acidulated. That's a word I wanted to.
And that's,
to
I think,
read
why
today.
people hate AI so much, is that it serves no purpose. Generative AI, at least. I mean, like, it could serve a purpose, but what's being foisted on everyone right now serves no purpose and helps no one and just hurts things.
It isn't stupid clown world by accident. It can only be this way, and until you change the mode of production, until you change the primary contradiction, which is socialization of labor, private accumulation of profit and product. Everyone, the hundreds work and one man gets the money. Like, that's why I put that in our freaking theme song, is because that's the primary contradiction. Nothing can really be changed permanently until that contradiction is dealt with in some way. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but and not for vibes reasons, because I think it's the quote right thing to do. I mean, I do think it's the right thing to do, but for scientific reasons, for the same reason that you can convert, for the same reason that chemicals combine and form other chemicals in chemistry, it's not because the chemicals like each other and both are Republicans. It's because that's just science. It's just how it works. That's how reality is. It's a material thing. Historical materialism. All right. We have seen that the ever-increasing perfectibility of modern machinery is, by the anarchy of social production, turned into a compulsory law that forces the individual industrial capitalist always to improve his machinery. If you don't get the newest and latest thing, you don't succeed in business. To increase its productive force, the bare possibility of extending the field of production is transformed for him into a similarly compulsory law. The enormous expansive force of modern industry, compared with which that of gases is mere child's play, appears to us now as a necessity for expansion, both qualitative and quantitative, that laughs at all resistance. Such resistance is offered by consumption, by sales, by the markets for the product of modern industry, but the capacity for extension, extensive and intensive, of the markets is primarily governed by quite different laws that work much less energetically. The extension of the markets cannot keep pace with the extension of production. The collision becomes inevitable, and as this cannot produce any real solution so long as it does not break in pieces the capitalistic mode of production, the collisions become periodic. Capitalist production has begotten another vicious circle. He's like, until you change the mode, you're going to inevitably have boom and bust cycles. Man, that was said in a very difficult to read way. As a matter of fact, since 1825, when the first general crisis broke out, the whole industrial and commercial world, production and exchange among all civilized people and their more or less barbaric hangers-on, are thrown out of joint about once every 10 years. Commerce is at a standstill, and the markets are glutted, products accumulate, and multitudinous as they are unsaleable. Hard cash disappears, credit vanishes, factories are closed, the mass of the workers are in want of the means of subsistence because they have produced too much of the means of subsistence. Bankruptcy, because Great Depression, this hadn't happened yet, but think about that, and that just happens every once in a while. The freaking market crash, freaking Obama market crash, we had the housing market thing, we've been through these a million times. The stagnation lasts for years. Productive forces and products are wasted and destroyed wholesale until the accumulated mass of commodities finally filter off, more or less depreciated in value until production and exchange gradually begin to move again. Little by little, the pace quickens. It becomes a trot. The industrial trot breaks into a canter. The canter in turn grows into a headlong gallop of a perfect steeplechase of industry, commercial credit, and speculation, which finally, after a breakneck leaps, ends where it began, in the ditch of a crisis. And so over and over again. Line go up, line go up. We have now, since the year 1825, gone through this 5 times. And at the present
How
moment,
is there no reason and no control over this? It's just let's just keep repeating this cycle. No one can do anything.
it's how the machine is geared to operate, and
I guess.
it is running on its own momentum, and we're gonna see how long it lasts. They figured this shit was falling apart any day in 1877. And we've kept it going for a little bit. And at the present moment, 1877, we are going through it for the 6th time. And the character of these crises is so clearly defined that Fourier hit all of them off when he described his first crisis plethorique, a crisis from plethora. Frickin' MLK. describes how it's like you live in a country where you starve because there's too much food, you're homeless because there's too much housing. It's because the market things. The market, if you just insist on this market nonsense, it just increases poverty through its own mechanisms, not because there's an evil Scrooge, but just for math reasons. You can't. It doesn't sustain in a way that everyone's having a good time. You need to have certain people be really broke for the system to work at all. All right. In these crises, the contradiction between socialized production and capitalist appropriation ends in a violent explosion. The circulation of commodities is, for the time being, stopped. Money, the means of circulation, becomes a hindrance to circulation. All the laws of production and circulation of commodities are turned upside down. The economic collision has reached its apogee. The mode of production is in rebellion against the mode of exchange. The fact that socialized organization of production within the factory has developed so far that it has become incompatible with the anarchy of production in society, which exists side by side with and dominates it, is brought home to the capitalists themselves by the violent concentration of capital that occurs during crises, through the ruin of many large and still greater number of small capitalists. The whole mechanism of the capitalist mode of production breaks down under the pressure of the productive forces, its own creations. It is no longer able to turn all this mass of means of production into capital. They lie fallow, and for that very reason, the Industrial Reserve Army must also lie fallow. Means of production, means of subsistence, available laborers, all the elements of production and of general wealth are present in abundance, but abundance becomes the source of distress and want, Fourier, because it is the very thing that prevents the transformation of the means of production into subsistence and subsistence into capital. For in capitalistic society, the means of production can only function when they have undergone a preliminary transformation into capital, into the means of exploiting human labor power. The necessity of this transformation into capital of the means of production and subsistence stands like a ghost between these and the workers. It alone prevents the coming together of the material and personal levers of production. It alone forbids the means of production to function, the workers to work and live. On the one hand, therefore, the capitalistic mode of production stands convicted of its own incapacity to further direct these productive forces. On the other, these productive forces themselves, with increasing energy, press forward to the removal of the existing contradiction, to the abolition of their quality as capital, to the practical recognition of their character as social production forces. Basically, like, you gotta treat us like, come on, we're the reason this all works. You can't just treat us like trash. We're the whole reason this is even cycling. All right, I'm going to skip ahead to how many paragraphs am I skipping here? Because he has like a summary at the end that I want to hit because we only got so much time left. But as always, I recommend people go read this stuff. Just do it. If you read even one pamphlet, see me reading out loud. You can read a lot faster if you're not doing it manually, like with your mouth, like I'm doing right now. So you could probably crank through this within, I'd say, an hour per chapter. So that's 3 total hours. Stretch that over 3 days. Come on, you can do it. Stretch
And
it over
what was
6
it?
days.
It was on Marxist.org or something. What's the website?
Marxists.org, or if you just type in the title, it's going to be like one of the top Google results. These pamphlets are kind of plastered all over the place. You can find a lot of sources, and they're all going to be pretty much equal. I don't think there's any like messed up translations that you should stay away from or whatever. But they do work at keeping this stuff up for free, especially the really popular ones like this. Okay, let me find my summary. Here we go. Let us briefly sum up. It's pretty brief. Briefly sum up our sketch of historical evolution. 1. Medieval society. Individual production on a small scale. Means of production adapted for individual use. Hence, primitive, ungainly, petty, dwarfed in action. Production for immediate consumption, either the producer himself or his feudal lord. Only where in excess of production over this consumption occurs is such excess offered for sale, enters into exchange. Production of commodities, therefore, is only in its infancy. Very few commodities floating around. Mostly you give it to your lord, or you eat it, or you give it to your kids. Direct consumption here. But already it contains within itself in embryo anarchy in the production of society at large. Nobody's talking to each other. You just, I got some extra yarn. You want it? $5 kind of thing. It's like very not the most important dominant mode of doing things. Capitalist revolution. Transformation of industry at first be simple means of cooperation and manufacture. Concentration of the means of production hitherto scattered into great workshops. As a consequence, their transformation from individual to social means of production. A transformation which does not, on the whole, affect the form of exchange. The old forms of appropriation remain in force. The capitalist appears. In his capacity as owner of the means of production, he also appropriates the products and turns them into commodities. When you get a bunch of people working for you, and then you take all their stuff and you maintain the profit and product created by a bunch of different people. The only kind of production we have ever really known, or at least of like social production, like nobody's out there smelting an individual iron bar by themselves like anymore. No, you're in a big thing. You're in a big factory. One guy drives a train car that's 2 miles long, as we learned in the Biden administration. Okay, old forms of appropriation remain in force. Capitalist appears in his capacity of owner of the means of production. He also appropriates the products and turns them into commodities. Production has become a social act. Exchange and appropriation continue to be individual acts. The acts of individuals. The owners get to individually exchange. The social product is appropriated by the individual capitalist. Fundamental contradiction, whence arise all the contradictions in which our present-day society moves, and which modern industry brings to light. A. Severance of the producer from the means of production. Condemnation of the worker to wage labor for life. Antagonism between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. B. Growing predominance and increasing effectiveness of the laws governing the production of commodities. Unbridled competition. Contradiction between socialized organization in the individual factory and social anarchy in the production as a whole. C. On one hand, perfecting of machinery made by competition compulsory for each individual manufacturer and complemented by a constantly growing displacement of laborers, industrial reserve army. On the other hand, unlimited extension of production, also compulsory under competition for every manufacturer. On both sides, unheard of development of productive forces, excess of supply over demand and overproduction of products, excess there of laborers, without employment and without means of existence. But these two levers of production and of social well-being are unable to work together because the capitalist form of production prevents the productive forces from working and the products from circulating unless they are first turned into capital, which their very superabundance prevents. Can't freaking get it to market. It's too much. The contradiction has grown into an absurdity. The mode of production rises in rebellion against the form of exchange. D. Partial recognition of the social character of the productive forces forced upon the capitalists themselves, taking over of the great institutions for production and communication. First by joint stock companies, later by trust. Oh, look, we're finally getting to like our like modern day here. Later in trusts, and then by the state. The bourgeoisie demonstrated to be a superfluous class. So today you can make a really good argument that the bourgeois class has been essentially sublated, absorbed by the state, because they work so closely with each other that they're kind of the same thing. It's really hard to find anyone who's successful in this world, like on the grand scheme, who doesn't have government contracts. Like the government just Elon Musk, all his freaking money comes from like DARPA and shit. Like it's all in league with the state, and you can't really become bourgeois without the state at least approving of the stuff you're doing. So it's like where the line has become extremely blurry in like the state and the bourgeois class. Like it's just kind of we have our bizarro bad timeline socialism right now.
Some people get socialism. It's just not like everyone who should.
If you can't fail if you're rich enough. The government will simply take care of you. All right, bourgeois demonstrated to be a superfluous class. So I think we're there. All its social functions now performed by salaried employees. Proletariat. See, Engels knew what that was. This is 1877. He's basically describing today America. 3. Proletarian Revolution. Solution of the contradictions. The proletariat seizes the public power, and by means of this transforms the socialized means of production, slipping from the hands of the bourgeoisie into public property. By this act, the proletariat frees the means of production from the character of capital they have thus far borne, and gives their socialized character complete freedom to work itself out. Socialized production upon a predetermined plan becomes henceforth possible. A planned economy, if you've heard about that, is essentially what he's talking about. Because we already have a planned economy. It's just planned in favor of our bourgeois state thing going on, and instead of geared for the benefit of everyone, feeding everyone, instead of like, what if we could make the most money by turning stuff into capital, commodity production, blah, blah, blah. The development of production makes the existence of different classes of society thenceforth an anachronism. In proportion as anarchy in social production vanishes, the political authority of the state dies out. Man, at last the master of his own form of social organization, becomes at the same time the lord over nature, his own master, free, Oh, nice. To accomplish this act of universal emancipation is the historical mission of the modern proletariat. To thoroughly comprehend the historical contradictions and thus the very nature of this act, to impart to the now oppressed proletarian class a full knowledge of the conditions and the meaning of the momentous act it is called upon to accomplish, this is the task of the theoretical expression of the proletarian movement, scientific socialism. It's the goal. It's what we're doing. Yeah, and you see where we're at the end of this, where you have all these stages of we had kings and queens, and then then capitalists show up. Well, not show up, but once commodity production exists, and then people are like, hey, we should get a bunch of people together and do that as a team. And then that evolves into 100,000 people making up these mega corporations. Yet a very small board of stockholders, the people who've won, get to actually make decisions for it and take stuff to market as, quote, individuals, even though it takes sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, it's the world. All of us, we're all cogs in this freaking machine. We're just supposed to be able to share in it. It's it's illogical for us to not. If we make the thing, if basically everything that you touch in this world was the actual work was done by somebody probably making minimum wage or less, maybe we should all benefit socially from our extremely socialized production that is at this point intractable. Everything is so socially. I mean, right now in your room, count how many different countries were involved in the production of all the stuff that you have, how many different total people touched all of the stuff that you just use. We're there, baby. We're way farther than they were in the 1800s.
There's no way that capitalism can work for everyone. It relies on slave labor. It relies on marginalization
on one
of
pole, on the
people,
other pole.
yeah, so that other people can commercially gain from from such a thing. And that's basically where we are. I mean, we're subjected as the proletariat and as the working class and as the disabled class and as the elderly class are subject to harsh punitive capitalism, whereas these small upper echelon of society is able to just game the system by milking the government for money, who is like, yeah, we'll keep doing that because then you give us our money back, but like to our persons individually, and we want that. So the lower classes are seen as being worthless and of no value to them. So again, it said in the end it's Proletariat Revolution. That's where this ends. So let's
I
get
think
on
people
back.
imagine it because I mean, look at this in the section that was a capitalist revolution. Sometimes there are flashpoints, like the French Revolution was a bourgeois revolution to overthrow feudalism and like a lot of the priest class, etc. So like that, but that event, it wasn't like there was no progress and then everything happened. It's kind of like things are developing constantly. What we are already living in the beginnings of what will in the future be referred to our American socialism, like came out of that's already happening now. And it doesn't mean that like no one does anything. That just everyone just sits still and the socialism will take effect if you just let it run long enough. I think this machine might have more of its own inertia and momentum to run off of than any of us imagine, and you can maybe accelerate that through intentionally making some moves, or we wait for it to fall apart and then you have like hell on earth for a short amount of time, hopefully short amount of time, and then you emerge from the ash. That's what usually tends to happen. There's usually a freaking civil war, and then somebody gets invaded by somebody else, and then you move. But like, historically, if we're talking about historical materialism, but that doesn't need to there's no destiny saying that needs to happen. The point, like in his last sentence, I scrolled away from it. The last sentence here. To thoroughly comprehend the historical conditions and thus the very nature of this act, to impart to the now oppressed proletarian class a full knowledge of the conditions and of the meaning of the momentous act it is called upon to accomplish. This is the task. Like if you're gonna be a nerd here and be like, I'm a communist, like I'm gonna join a party and like that's and not because you're the communism explainer, just to be like, look, man, here's what has happened. Let's do a materialist analysis of fucking reality and history.
Right?
And with Americans, there's a lot of you don't have to freaking talk down to people. We don't even need to. If you just enforced our Constitution the way it is, you'd be a hell of a lot closer to
Right.
to your to building socialism than you than you are today.
Yeah.
we
It
don't even
would be
necessarily have to
nice.
do a whole new American Revolution. It's more just like, hey, we have laws. Why don't we start like applying them to everyone? And
Right.
wow,
Yeah.
wow, the magic I think that might accomplish.
Yeah. We just have to uh, consider this the reign of the tech companies as being the modern day feudalists. That is if other people in history have been able to take on the giants, there's no reason that the working class can't do the same. We
They're trying to do a
outnumber them.
rewind, but it's just like impossible. Like if you look historically, people have been trying to do that forever. Like back when feudalism was going down, there were people who was like, no, let's just go back to having a king, and it just
Right?
never happens. It's impossible. It
No,
seems to be
yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's
Yeah.
pretty much you can't go back from that. And people won't go back from that.
So it's
And if you're
exciting.
like, well, what am I supposed to do? How do I do it? Well, then that's again where protesting and boycotting comes in. And if they're trying to put a data center in your neighborhood, go and show up to the meetings and be like, hey, no.
The more you
That's
educate
what you
yourself, the
do.
more you can try to find useful expressions of your energy. The more you don't accidentally end up going to a quote Gen Z protest in Mexico.
Right?
Okay, I've got to get
Yeah.
off here and go to
Yeah.
do a couple of things and go to work. Thank
We've
you all
got
very
some
much for
things
listening
to
to me
do.
today.
We've been on with our bonus episode here, so thanks for listening and joining us. And again, you can check out our entire catalog of episodes on our YouTube channel, on our Rumble channel. We're on all the other socials, so like, follow, subscribe, do the things. And thanks for joining us. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you again soon. So, bye.